Hi everyone, my name is Heidi Totten and I am the Marketing Director at Wisdom Window, and I am so excited to have Shayne Chance joining me today for our Wisdom Window webinar. Shayne has over 20 years of experience helping women to get unstuck in a variety of ways, and we're going to go into that a lot deeper than that sentence. But I first want to start off by welcoming Shayne. Hi Shayne, how are you?
Hi Heidi, I'm great. Thank you for having me here today. I'm excited.
I am too. I am too. This will be great. So Shayne, let's just dive in because there's a lot that I want to cover with you and a lot of questions that I want to ask with you. But first, just what is your story? What is the story that got you here, sitting in this chair being interviewed right now?
Wow. That story actually goes back a lot of years. I was actually assaulted when I was 5, the first time. And it was a horrific enough event that it actually put me into a mental block that lasted for about 10 years. When everything started coming back to me when I was 15, I recognized it, remembered it, knew it for exactly what it was. And I think there were some aspects of that created some issues later in my life, but as soon as 17, which was 2 years after all this came back to me, I was actually assaulted again on a date rape scenario. And at that point, I guess what kind of got me here was at that point I said, this will never happen to me again. And so I specifically took steps in my life to make sure that it didn't. But along the way, there ended up being some issues that developed from what happened, specifically because when I was 15 and all this came back to me, I went to talk to someone who should have been one of those people that you could trust to take information like this to them and they would help. The problem is that my response was not what I thought it would have been. The response was, well, if it had been that bad, you would have said something sooner.
Wow.
What happens when a situation like that happens? First of all, they didn't have the tools to deal with it, and that was a problem. But it took me a lot of years to realize that they just didn't have the tools in the toolbox to help me brought something that huge to them.
Now, when was this? What time period?
15.
Right. What year? What year was it?
What year was it? You're asking me to give up my age. I would have to think back. It was about 35 years ago.
Okay. So the reason I ask is that we've seen such a huge turnover in how people respond to assault.
Absolutely.
And so looking back 35 years ago, the tools that people had and they kind of shove it under the rug mentality, it's changed a lot since then.
It's huge, and I am so grateful for that because now these are issues that we can bring out into the open. These are issues that we can talk about. These are issues that we can say, hey, this is a huge thing. Not only is it okay to talk about it, it's okay to stand up for myself and do something about it.
Absolutely.
And that's what I want to hear. That's what I want to be able to help people recognize in themselves, that they have a choice.
Okay, so we're going to go back. Okay. And I'm not a therapist, so if it starts getting, I mean, I understand. I was abused as well. Okay. So when you started realizing what happened and you started having that feeling, 15, that's a hard time of life anyway. You're a teenager, you've got the hormones going on, all sorts of stuff. What was your response to that? How did you react as you realized that this event had happened?
Well, I think as with anybody, it was shock, especially because what I discovered was, for me, most traumatic about this was the fact that it was somebody that I knew. This was a person in my neighborhood. This was a person in my church. This was a person that I saw on a consistent basis. Not overly consistent, but consistent enough. And the other problem that came from that is that when I got the reaction that I did from this individual that I shared this with, it wasn't the reaction I was expecting. And as a result, in order to survive all of this download of emotion and this download of recalling an experience that was quite traumatic in my life, I had to start telling myself stories in order to make it through, and stories to survive, so that I didn't get sucked into this hole of fear and hole of despair and pain and all these things that, like you said, at 15, I'm already dealing with hormonal issues.
Yeah.
This made it, this complicated everything.
So I worked in a group home for troubled teens when I was in college, and my abuse took place ages 12 to 16. And so I was very cognizant and very aware of what was going on, and creating stories of my own.
Right.
Because I had to live that double life. Right. You know, this was the home life, this was outside, I was fine, everything was perfect. And so when I worked in the group home, it was really interesting to go and to work with I worked with 52 different teenagers in one year that came through. And these were girls that had gone through abuse, and I mean, the stories were horrific. And one of the things that I really was amazed, and the method at that time, so that's kind of why I was asking for the time period, was behavior modification. It was basically, and as I watched this happen, I just cringed thinking about it, but that was the whole focus, was instead of helping them heal through it, it was change your behavior and become kind of super disciplined and super, I don't know how to explain it, but
it was like teaching them to tell themselves a story
right,
to make it through.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so these girls I just watched them as they were just reaching out for help, and a lot of them were medicated. And so it was basically like, we're just going to ride you through this until you get over it. And there's a lot of, post-traumatic stress disorder that goes with it. So in your journey, so this happened again at 17.
Right.
So 5 years old, mental block. 15, it starts to come out, and then it happens again at 17. What was your response, and what did you do after that? You said it was never going to happen to me again. What were the steps that you took to make sure that would not happen again?
Well, I can be honest with you, Heidi. When I started going through this the second time, and I made that commitment to myself to no longer give off whatever vibes or whatever it was that brought these types of people to me. Yeah.
I know. Yeah.
I did. I lived that dual life that you talked about. On the outside, people saw me as strong, as confident, as secure, as, this powerful, person as I was going through life and plowing my way through life. But I can promise you, for many, many, many years, most of the decisions I made were fear-based decisions. And I think the problem with that is that we do that. People are either moving away from something or they're moving towards something.
Right.
And generally speaking, when you make a fear-based decision, you're moving away from something.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to keep yourself out of a space that's uncomfortable for you. And that's really what I was doing most of my life. I would make decisions, and a lot of them were really good decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of those decisions weren't. A lot of those decisions were fear-based. And those came as a result of, again, the stories that we tell ourselves to survive.
And how were your relationships? I'm curious because of my own experience, how you approach relationships, because we were just talking about this right before we started filming, how in my relationships, my dating relationships, I would either put people in a pit, like I was better than they were, and made me feel better about myself, or on a pedestal. And then it made me feel better about myself because I was dating them. So they sort of became a trophy or a conquest or something like that. But what was your experience with that?
I don't think I ever really thought about, did I put people on a pit or a pedestal? I think my reaction to all of that was really, it became very internal. And so I wasn't so much focused on what was going on around me. I think one of the things that I really struggled with was that I had that belief system that I would never get anything better than what I had. And so sometimes I ended up settling in relationships or settling, with situations that I wasn't really happy with, but really believed that, and again, stories, really believed that was the best I could ever have. Right. Because I didn't believe any better of myself.
Right.
And that was what was so crazy. I could take and work in my personal life, and my personal life, was a mess. But I could go out and do a business and work in my business life, and I was in charge. I was in control. I was great. Nothing was bad. Everything was good.
You learned to compartmentalize.
I did.
You know?
I did. And it was hard because I found that if things were going well in my personal life, they were not going well in my business life. And if they went well in my business life, they weren't going well in my personal life.
So it's really, you had to have an outlet somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And it was tough. I think that that's where it probably affects people the most, is in their relationships. Not only the relationship with others, but their relationship with themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And unfortunately, that relationship with yourself affects all the others.
Really true. So you were talking about fear-based decisions. I went to a writer's retreat. Actually, Bridget Cook, who has her Write Juicy program on Wisdom Window, and she has a writer's retreat every few months, and it's very intensive. But it's also very therapeutic and healing.
Oh, nice.
And the Saturday night, my friend Heather Lauder was talking about how in Africa, on the African plains in safari, but it's not really safari to them, it's just being animals, that gazelles, what will happen in a tribe of lions is that the older lions will kind of pack together and they will roar, and the younger lions, who are the attack lions, will be separate from them. And so the gazelle, if they're attacking or going after prey, the big lions will roar and the gazelle will run from fear right into the jaws of the younger. And if we ran towards fear, or if they ran towards fear, they'd be safe. And this really powerful metaphor came out of that for all of us in this group, where we were talking about run towards the fear. Like, there's actually safety in running towards the fear. Really, what are your thoughts on that?
You know what? I'm glad you said that. I actually did a training, and I have a training called Making Fear Work for You.
Wow. Oh, wow. Perfect. There you go.
And I think the cool part about that whole concept is the fact that fear works either for us or against us. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that depends on how we see fear. Mm-hmm. And how we and choices we make, because you can make the decision to have fear. As bizarre as it sounds, if I'm having a nightmare, I can very often turn to myself in my own dream and say, wake up. This is scary. Yes. Wake up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that we have the ability to restructure our thinking in such a way that we can not be afraid of fear, but we can identify when we are afraid and what we need to do to change that around, have a paradigm shift so that fear works for us. And the way we learn to do that really is by trusting intuition. And I know a lot of us nowadays, it's like intuition is woo buzzword. It is the woo buzzword, but the cool thing is that intuition really is our best friend. And the reason it is because honestly, we're its host.
Right.
And it's going to protect us. And visually, we see everything that's in front of us with our eyes. But our intuition sees everything, and it senses everything, and it feels everything. And actually, the greatest antithesis of fear is judgment.
Explain that.
Okay, so let's say you've lived in your house for 10 years, and you've walked up and down your street 500 times, right? And nothing has happened in 500 times.
Right.
But let's say on the 501st time you're walking down the street, you get this really uncomfortable feeling. So you kind of look around, but you don't really notice anything right off. And so the first thing you do is your judgment says, you've walked down the street 500 times and nothing's ever happened. What makes you think something's going to happen on the 501st time? So we shrug it off. We say, oh, I'm just being stupid. I'm overreacting. I'm panicking. There's nothing out there. There's nothing wrong. And then we look for nothing to be wrong.
Gotcha.
Instead of trusting that intuition. Because intuition isn't always about fear. It isn't always about something being wrong. Intuition is about saying something different than it usually is. Pay attention. You could move into a house that you haven't ever lived in. You could live in your house and never wake up at the sound of anything at night. But you could move into a new house, and the first 3 nights you wake up, every time the air conditioner goes off, or every time the heater kicks on, or every time the ice maker makes ice.
That's why people don't sleep well in hotel rooms. different sounds.
And that's your intuition, just saying, hey, something's different.
Mm-hmm.
So your key here now is to start paying attention to what's different, not looking for everything that's okay, because you already are aware of everything that's okay. Intuition's going off because it's saying something's not okay or something's different than it's been.
Mm-hmm.
So our purpose now is to pay attention to that intuition and not squelch it with judgment.
Interesting. This morning, my little girl was just, playing around in the driveway, but she was out there by herself, which, I was kind of coming and going, and there was a car down the street and a man talking on a cell phone standing outside, and I didn't know him, and I just, again, you're right, something different, and I was like, I didn't feel like she was in danger. I just felt like, So I had her come inside. Turned out he was a landscaper. He was just talking to someone, but it was enough for me to say, I'm not going to leave my little girl out here when I'm about to leave the house.
Something's different.
Something's different, and I have a babysitter and everything that came in, but it was just listen, just pay attention. And I think so often we're running that we don't stop and pay attention.
We don't. Awareness is a huge factor in safety in general.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a tendency to live outside of the moment. We don't live in the moment.
Mm-hmm.
So we're always projecting forward, which means we're not paying attention to what's going on now.
Right.
And that's critical. In awareness, that's critical, especially when it comes to our safety.
Absolutely. Okay, so in this journey, so then you're 17, you're kind of going through this journey. What happened? What were the things going on in your life? You mentioned that you were in business, and when did you start to feel like I can have an impact on other people from my experience?
Well, ironically enough, the minute that happened, after it happened that second time, I said to myself, this will never happen again. That's when I decided. I said, now, I'm not only am I going to make sure that it doesn't happen to me ever again, I'm going to see what I can do to make sure it doesn't happen to anybody else ever. And I took steps right at that point in my life to start attending self-defense trainings, and specifically working very close in learning karate.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I will always consider karate the most valuable tool because it's something that can never been taken from you, and it's something you have with you all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes it a higher benefit to things that we carry outside of ourselves, although those can be effectual.
Mm-hmm.
But I went and worked in karate for a while, and ironically had a sensei from another studio call the studio I was at, and I'd never spoken to before, but I answered the phone. And he asked me, well, why are you taking karate? So I told him, I've been assaulted twice. I don't want to have that ever happen again. I want to break free from that cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, I've been teaching them. They haven't been going well. Would you mind coming and just kind of being a counterpart with me and helping me figure out what's going on? Bless his heart. He was a wonderful person who really had a strong desire to help women, but I didn't see him for the first time until we showed up to do this training. And when he walked in, I'm not kidding, he looked like your worst enemy. I mean, he was about 5'7", dark hair, dark skin, he was wearing dark clothes, was missing half of a front tooth, and I went, I think I'm already afraid. And I could tell that was the impact he had on the audience as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing was that although he was really into trying to help women, he was also very much into the, for lack of a better term, the blood and guts of an assault.
Mm.
And unfortunately, that was creating more fear rather than eliminating fear.
Gotcha.
Now, people who know me know I can't be serious for any extended period of time. Mm-hmm. So my trainings have a lot of humor in them. Mm-hmm. It's not that I downplay the assault at all. It's not that I downplay anything about this aspect of life. But I have learned, and I learned at that point, that people, if you teach with fear, they remember nothing but fear.
True.
If you teach with humor, they remember a lot about what you said because it made them feel good even though it was a touchy subject. Mm-hmm. So I actually went on several trainings with him, started loosening him up a little bit. The training started going well. After about 6 weeks, he was called back to Texas, and he called me up and he said, I've had a family emergency. I don't know if I'll ever be back.
Mm.
And I was like,
Oh.
but I thought, you know what? It's okay. My time will come. I'm going to go ahead, go back to the karate, take the training, build everything that I need to build and get it going in my life so that when that time comes, I'll be ready. 2 weeks later, the studio got a phone call, and my sensei came up to me and he said, we've had a phone call for you to come and teach me women's self-defense training.
Wow.
Are you up to it? And I said, absolutely. And I actually went home that night, wrote what became a 3-hour training called Victim or Victor.
Mm.
And I have been actually doing that training for over 20 years. I have upgraded and updated a little bit, but generally speaking, the format's the same. It's amazing that things haven't changed in that time period, but the basic format and foundation for that training is phenomenal. It's huge.
So let's talk about what you offer, because you offer that training. That's part of what you do, but you also just wrote a book.
I did. I'm kind of excited about that. It is exciting. The reason I actually wrote that was with a lot of encouragement from a lot of people. Now, the book is not really long, and it really isn't.
That's even better.
Yeah, it really isn't intended to be. It's intended to really get to the heart of what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
The book is called Story of Lies, and part of it is about acknowledging that we've been in an abusive situation, or that we are in an abusive situation. And that's really hard, especially if you started out as a child being abused.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to draw those lines. They're very unclear. But it's about acknowledging abuse in either previously or currently. And then it's about accepting that and trying to move past that.
Mm-hmm.
And then it actually goes into prevention. And the reason I wrote it, it's kind of like a short life lessons learned type of a scenario. But I wrote it because I knew I myself had struggled with these stories that I had told myself over and over and over to get me through. And at some point I realized that although I had progressed in some areas of my life, I was still very much stuck in other areas.
Okay, so let me stop you there and ask you, stuck in what areas? Because interestingly, I had this conversation over the weekend with a woman who said, who was assaulted when she was very young. And one of the things she said was that she had to, or has allowed herself, which I think this is just beautiful, to go back to that time period. And even though she's a grown woman and has children and grandchildren, and she'll literally become like a 3-year-old so that she can experience 3 and that age in a safe way, even though she's an adult. So when you say stuck, what were the areas that you felt stuck? Because it was a time period in your life, or was it specific things?
For me, it was very specific things. One of those things I mentioned was not just making fear-based decisions, but learning to recognize when I was making those fear-based decisions and trying to identify why I was feeling fearful in that moment that I made that decision. And the sad part is that I wish I could relate it all back to it was just about my assault. But unfortunately, that carried over into a lot of other areas of my life. So I may have felt uncomfortable in a situation or a scenario that had nothing to do with abuse.
Right.
But I was still making a fear-based decision because I was afraid of outcomes.
Right.
And not knowing what the outcome was going to be, or being afraid because of the story I was telling myself of what the outcome could be. Now I found myself, again, I think my biggest thing was making fear-based decisions. I think additionally to that, I didn't have the kind of confidence in myself and my abilities that I should have. Now, I don't recall specifics of anything that was said to me that would have caused that, for me to not feel secure about myself. But that was one of the biggest things, too, is that I look back on my life and I thought, man, I wish I'd had the confidence then that I have now. I would have been so much farther along the path.
I know.
But I think it was that fear, and I think fear is a very controlling thing in our life in a negative way. But again, I took that and put a twist on it and created that Making Fear Work for You training that I did that really helps us understand how fear can be a friend and work to our benefit. And I do that, I teach that in the victim or victor training, which is an hour-and-a-half verbal presentation and then an actual hour-and-a-half physical demonstration. But I actually consider the hour-and-a-half verbal presentation the most important because,
Absolutely.
yeah, because honestly, if you listen to that or go through that, that teaches us about awareness. It goes through a 4A concept that goes through awareness, attitude, anger, and action.
Okay.
And it touches base on those things and how they affect us and how it affects how we handle and cope with life.
So let me ask you, when you work with people, do you take them through any sort of visualization process to help them kind of redefine the moment? I have a good friend who works with energy, and a few years ago, it's interesting that you use the victor or the victim because we were going through a, I guess it was a personal development course, and we had there was a lot of accountability stuff going on. And one time on the call, I was sitting there listening, and I thought, every single woman on here is a victim, and it's driving me insane. Like, what is wrong? I mean, it just triggered all sorts of things. So I called my friend who was the facilitator, and I said, I need to talk to you. These women are crazy. I mean, I was just, now I probably wouldn't use the same words. I learned a little bit. But she said, why are you afraid of victims? What's going on there? And I was like, well, because I'm not a victim. I mean, that was kind of my stance was, well, I'm not a victim, blah, 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 blah. She's like, why are you afraid of being a victim? I mean, it was really funny because it was, and so as she took me through this visualization process, I was able to, what I realized is that I had put my 12-year-old self in a cage. I was like, nope, not part of my life. Just
lock you away.
It's going to lock you away. So she took me through a process of letting her out, but leaving her there. You can just hang around the cage, You're not in it, but you're going to just hang out for a while. And then about 6 months later, I said, okay, I think I'm ready to do something else with her. What else am I supposed to do with her? So it was kind of going through this process. But one process that was hugely powerful was she kind of said, okay, pretend there's a spotlight and you're holding the spotlight and you're that 12-year-old girl. Who is around you? Who was sent to help you along the way? They didn't know you were going through it, but they were your earthly angels, so to speak. And when I realized that, my mind shifted about the event. And I realized, like, okay, this was something that was powerful for me to go through in order to serve others. So, like you said, outcome, the event happened, my response varied from year to year, and the varying levels of my response created the outcome in my life. And so learning to change your response to an event can determine the outcome. So in that, I guess going back to my original question, do you use a kind of visualization process, or what kind of tools do you give people so that when they leave your seminars and your trainings, they can go home and they can duplicate it in different areas?
Well, I think one of the biggest things, let's go back to my victim or victor training.
Okay.
And correlate the book that I wrote, Story of Lies. And I loved what you said because, honestly, I think that one of the biggest struggles that we have, like you said, there were stories that you told yourself around this 12-year-old girl.
Yeah.
And even if that story was, I'm going to write you out of the book.
Yes. And you're not in the journal.
You're not there anymore.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is, and this is one of the chapters in my book, you are not what you see, you are what you believe. Wow. The problem is, conversely, what we believe then becomes what we see.
Right.
So the idea is that we hear a story, or we believe a story, or we live a story. Okay. Once we believe that story, whatever it is, eventually we become that story.
Yes.
And that's the detrimental belief systems that we carry if the story that we chose to believe is somehow skewed or inaccurate. Now, unfortunately, because we believe it, it feels accurate and it feels true, but it's not. I work with women who have eating disorders. I work with, places that have that they're dealing with women, and most of them are from abuse. And you can take this room full of beautiful women, and it breaks my heart to see how they see themselves, because the story from what I see of them versus what they see themselves is very, very different. And when I talk about story of lies, it really is, it's kind of direct. You'll understand. I mean, I'm a very empathetic person. I have a lot of compassion for people. I hate to see anybody struggling. I can't even touch the young abuse, the abuse of young people. It was so detrimental to me as a child that it's very difficult for me to see that kind of suffering at all. But when I work with, women, girls ages, say 8 and up, I see them I'm able to work with them in a very different way. And part of that way is to, what this lady did with you is to help you now rewrite the story. One of the things that we talk about is gratitude. And gratitude is a huge paradigm shift in people who have been abused. If you can take a look at and this is what I did. I took a couple of situations that were horrible situations, and revamped them by a thought process. And that thought process was, at first it was an anger thought process. This is never going to happen to me again. Right. I am not going to go. Unfortunately, it never has. Okay. Not that that's a challenge, but it never has. And I believe a lot of that has to do with the way I thought about myself. But one of the things that I found that was very critical to me was, later, as I started thinking through all this, I became grateful for the direction that it sent me. Now, I was never grateful for what happened, but I was grateful for the outcomes of that, because I feel like I've been able to touch a lot of people's lives. And that was huge for me. In ways that never happened to me, I would have never been able to I would have probably never gone that direction in my life. Never even thought about it. But because it happened to me, that was the direction I chose to go. And I have taught over 20 plus years, tens of thousands of women. Wow. And young girls, and they're awesome. Their insight is incredible, and their teachability is incredible, because most of them haven't learned that fear yet. But even to see, when I teach my trainings, I always have, when I do the victim or victor one in particular, I teach them at the end specific things, and there's one technique that I teach in the very beginning that I try to get around to everybody in the room. I have pretty small classes, so I can do that. I try to get around to everyone in the room. And as wonderful as visual is, until they feel it, they don't believe it. And that's why I say it's so cool to be able to do this, because I can show them this technique, and to watch it doesn't look like it's anything that big. But when I actually do the technique on them and show them how effective it is, all of a sudden they go, oh, I get it. So what I think for me was the biggest healer is kind of what you talked about. These people that are around you, you were able to develop a level of gratitude for being there in your life at those times, even though they didn't know. And I had people like that too. So for me, I think that being able to develop a level of gratitude for what happened is a huge healer.
Absolutely huge. So how would somebody get started? If somebody who's watching this is saying, okay, I'm ready to take this on, do they read your book first? Do they attend a seminar first? What are the steps that you would recommend? And some people might just need to read a book first. They might just need to, because creating that acknowledgement that something happened. What would you recommend?
I think the book is a great, helpful first step. I definitely do. Keep in mind, it is very direct. It's intended to kind of rattle you just a little bit, and then invite you to make a different choice. As tough as that sounds, it's interesting. One of the things that I have found over the years is that we have a lot of women who are very, very insecure, very, very unsure. And even though that there may be an aspect of them that says, I want to get out of being stuck. I want to get out of this space that's holding me down and keeping me from progressing. Even though I may be progressing over here, I can see I'm not progressing over here. We have a lot of that going on in women. They are very lost.
Yeah.
And the sad thing is that they have so many strengths and things inside them, but whatever it is that's holding them down suppresses those strengths, or their belief in those strengths and the value of those strengths.
Yeah.
So when you ask another option, I'm also putting together a new series for Wisdom Window called the Celebration Series.
Perfect.
And the cool thing about the Celebration Series is it is about strength and some other focus. So strength and self-reliance, strength and vitality, strength and new beginnings. And the reason I start each of them with a form of strength is because I want us to identify the strengths we have in ourselves, to acknowledge them, to accept them, to respect them, and then to share them.
To use them as gifts.
To use them as gifts. And I can tell you the sad part is, if I were to ask a woman, what do you find beautiful about you? 95% of the time they will say a physical attribute. Not only that, they'll say it peripherally. They'll say, well, I've been told I have really pretty eyes.
Right.
Or people will say, I have a great smile. They don't even acknowledge it themselves. They have to say that it's okay to say because someone else said it.
Yeah, I'm just going to say I'm really brilliant. And I don't have a problem saying that. That is my 2014 world, is brilliance. So I'm just going to say, like, I've learned that I just have to own my strengths.
And it's okay to do that.
Yeah, that I'm just like, I am really, really smart.
That's the cool
it.
thing. And it's okay to accept that and to acknowledge that about ourselves. And so many women don't. We also don't see things as beautiful. The example I love to give is you take a woman who's never been married, never had children, but she will go out there and she will nurture someone else's children. I think that is a beautiful thing.
It is very beautiful.
And so I take and look at these things, and the Celebration Series is about focusing on those strengths, and then one of those focuses. And I have worked, the one thing I can say that has been really great about what I've done is I have met some of the most amazing, wonderful people who love to give back, who are eager and anxious to give back. They see the same things that I see, and they say, how can I help? So part of the other part of the Celebration Series is in each of these focuses, I will have professionals who I've met along the way who want to give back.
Perfect.
And they will talk about different aspects of the things that they do. It's not a high-pressure sale thing. It's really about their passion and their purpose and how what they do has made an impact. And if it resonates with people, now what I've done is offer you a professional who is willing to help you move to the next level, to give you that connection that I wish I'd had. That was the one thing I remember thinking, I don't know where to go to get some of the help that I want. I don't know who to talk to. I don't know, because it's uncomfortable enough that you're talking about, especially back then, something that happened to you. But even nowadays, we're having a hard time admitting, because we want to think, you take me as a perfect example. I was strong in the professional world, very, very strong. And people would look at me and think nothing was wrong. So how do I take that image that I had gained and then turn around and say, look what I had terrible happened to me?
Doesn't it just seem like we would all be better off if we were just willing to just really speak our truth and say, I really feel confident in this area, and that's what you see, but this is what I'm struggling with today. You know, these are the struggles that I'm having, and I mean, I feel like I'm really blessed to live in a world where in the entrepreneur space, people are kind of willing to just fail dramatically and be like,
I've told people I'm not afraid of failure. I do that really well.
I know, I'm awesome at failure. I've started and crashed so many businesses, it's not even funny, you know. So, but just being able to be honest, and I think the first step, and you've mentioned it throughout all of this, is being honest with yourself about what happened to you, and then making a different choice of how you want to respond to it. And that requires tools. It's not just you wake up one day and say, oh, I had this tragic and horrible event happen, but I'm just going to change my mind about what it looked like. I mean, it's a process. And I mean, when I left and I went to college, I decided I would go to counseling. And it was the first time that I had gone to counseling. And I remember walking into the counseling office, and the therapist was, I don't know, like a 55-year-old man. And I swear he was bored as I was talking to him, and I thought, oh, if this is therapy, I got a long way to go, you know? And so I didn't go back. And what I realized is that process, once you're willing to step into it, it can take years to reframe it, and there can be gaps where you don't even really work on it, and then something will trigger you, and you'll need to go back, and you'll need to heal another part of it, and then another part of it. But when you recognize along the journey that Shayne, that when people step into your life and say, okay, let's take another look at this, it's because it's time for another piece to heal.
It is. And, you know, if I can go back just a little bit, I don't know that I completely answered your question about, you know, changing stories, or how do you help people that way?
Mm-hmm.
But I thought about when I do my trainings, at the very end, I always say, or somewhere within them, I always say, I want you to do me a favor. Because I have a firm belief system in like I said, the stories that we tell ourselves and that we believe are the stories we become. And even if I mean, I guess the point that I'm saying is that what we really truly believe, even though we may project a different image, what we really truly believe really does come out in our life in different areas. And so when I don't do a lot of my trainings, I will tell people, I want you to go home and imagine yourself in every possible scenario that you could imagine yourself in and how it's going to end.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to see a positive ending. I want to see you being the winner. I want to see the outcome where you're successful. And I think by writing in the book, it's like when we read a book, we know how it ends, right?
Right.
If we don't read that book and we leave it to chance, we never know how it ends.
Yeah.
So I think that's really huge. Another thing, if it's okay if I bring up, I have another book, a couple of more that'll come out before Christmas, but one that's really in particular that I'm very excited about is called Dating the Enemy.
Wow.
And the cool thing about that is that people who are predators have a pattern. They have a system, just like any other business, if you will. Mm-hmm. And the idea behind Dating the Enemy is helping women to identify when they are being interviewed by a predator. Mm. And we're not talking just about girls that are dating. We're not talking about just young girls. We're talking about anybody who may find themselves in a situation, whether it's a work environment, a dating environment, a social environment, where someone could approach them and have conversation and to be able to identify. And the hard part about it is that it's all regular conversation.
Right.
It sounds like normal conversation.
That's where intuition kicks in.
Not only is that where intuition kicks in, but it also helps us when we start going ourselves, you know what? A few of these questions we all do. A few of these, you know, situations or comments are normal. But now I'm starting to pick up the fact that there's 5, 6, 7, 8 of these going on in a very short period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm concerned.
Right.
Now I'm aware.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm excited about that one and some other things.
Now, when are those coming up? Or when are do you have a release date for those?
I don't have a release date for those. We just released the Story of Lies. Mm-hmm. That I think should be completely up and available within the next day or two, totally ready to go. Dressed for a Kill is one that's also coming up.
Wow, these titles, man, they're like
they're very direct titles and they're attention grabbers. They're intended to be, because some of the topics are a little touchy. Dressed for a Kill is really about dress standards, and that's a very touchy subject because people say, I want to be able to dress the way I want to be able to dress, and you know what, you can. But there are two things that people need to keep in mind, and one of the most important ones I want them to keep in mind is, is the way you're dressing really telling what you want it to tell?
Yeah.
And not only that, keep in mind that it's not just about what you're saying by the way you dress, it's about what people are interpreting by the way you dress, especially predators.
Mm-hmm.
and then Dress for a Kill, and then I'm hoping to put together a Christmas one. So I'm looking to do all of this between now and the end of the year.
Awesome.
But they will be, like I said, they're intended to be really quick, direct, life lesson learned type stories. So I'm excited about that. I'm excited about this is something that you will be able to just sit down and take in either a lot or a little at a time, and hopefully gain some value from. And I'm real excited about the opportunity to be able to help people this way. The other stuff will be coming out as well. The Victim or Victor will start coming out. I also look to do some audio books, so you'll be able to get those same books in audio format.
Oh, perfect.
So if you'd rather listen while you're driving or whatever, then you can do that rather
try
than
not to get in a wreck.
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much for being here today, and we'll watch for your book to be up on Wisdom Window. That's wisdomwindow.com. Look for Shayne Chance, and is that under
Story of Life?
Right. What category is that? Personal development?
Under personal
development. So it's under the personal development category, and look for that this week. And I would love to have you come back and interview you when these different books come out, so that we can talk about those specific books. So great.
I would love it.
Okay,
thanks so much. I really
You're
appreciate
welcome.
your time.
You're welcome. All right. Well, we will see you next time. And in the meantime, go and check out wisdomwindow.com. You can become a free member and check out all of the different trainings that you can get and all of the transformations that you can experience. Have a great day.